In addition to his place in cinematic history, Pierce Brosnan, who once personified the unwavering elegance of James Bond in the iconic movie GoldenEye, has been adored for decades for his calm and unwavering dignity, which he has maintained throughout his turbulent life. He has stood next to graves that no father or spouse should ever have to see. Nevertheless, he has always come out of the ruins with dignity, fortitude, and a heart that is still open to love. He held his first wife's hand as she died at the age of 43 from the merciless grip of ovarian cancer. Years later, at the age of 41, his daughter was struck by the same ruthless illness, which tore away yet another part of his soul. And at 71, a darker shadow is encroaching, a darkness striking at the very center of his universe, threatening to take him back into the pit he has battled his whole life to avoid. And what he is preparing to do next has left those closest to him terribly alarmed. Before we begin, we'd love to hear from you. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rank Pierce Brosnan? Your opinion actually matters. Every grief story starts somewhere. Pierce Brosnan's story began in a sleepy Irish town with a father who never came back and the sound of a door closing. On May 16, 1953, he was born in Drogheda, Ireland, into a world devoid of riches, a legacy, and, almost instantly, the father who had given him his name. Pierce was too young to recall the departure of his father, Thomas Brosnan, a carpenter by profession. There was only silence after their disappearance, no terrible accident, no farewell. Many years later, Pice would remark, "I never heard his voice. I never knew his face. He spoke with the serene weight of a wound that time had never been able to mend." His mother, May, worked tirelessly as a nurse, attempting to construct some type of life for the two of them. However, she made the most agonizing decision a mother could make in 1957, when Pierce was only 4 years old, leaving Ireland to look for a job in London, with the assurance that it would only be temporary. That brief period turned into 7 arduous years. While she was away, Pierce lived with his grandparents in Navan for a while before moving in with an aunt and uncle in Trim. Every location has its own set of norms, distinct voices, and a sense of transience. He was taught at a young age to keep quiet, to move aside, and to be the boy who observed more than he talked. As if looking for something he couldn't identify, teachers saw something in him, a brilliance hidden behind the eyes of a child who was constantly glancing out the window. When he was 11 years old in 1964, his mother came back with William Carmichael, his new spouse. William was gentle, tolerant, never seeking to take another man's place. He gave Pice advice on how to fish, mend damaged things, and regain trust. However, even love could feel like something you might lose if you hung on to it too closely for a boy who had grown up in pieces. William accompanied him to see Goldfinger at the theater that same year. The screen was filled with Sean Connery's James Bond. Untouchable, strong, and self-assured. As a flame ignited deep inside Pierce, he thought, "That's the man I want to be." By the age of 16, that spark had led him to St. Martin's School of Art in London, where he pursued a painting career influenced by Freud and Bacon, living comfortably while classmates subsisted on tea and toast. He had never considered acting until he happened upon a fire eater rehearsing in a theater workshop one day in 1971. He requested impulsively to try. That single instant transformed his future. The troupe witnessed the calm weight of a life already put to the test, presence, and grit. Before long, Pierce was enrolled in one of the most rigorous acting programs in the nation at the Drama Centre, London. Over half of his peers left school. He continued to study Shakespeare, work odd jobs, and train in circus arts and mime. Despite coming from a less privileged background, he carried something much more durable. The persistent hunger of a youngster who had begun with nothing and had resolved never to end there. Hollywood fantasies weren't the first step on Pierce Brosnan's journey to the big screen. It all started with a fortuitous meeting that subtly changed his fate. He saw a future with brushes and canvases rather than cameras while he was a teenager studying art at St. Martin's School of Art. However, while exploring the city one afternoon in 1971, he happened onto a tiny theatrical workshop and discovered that he was witnessing a fire eater practice for a performance. He asked to try rather than go. Nobody had anticipated what that one impetuous moment had shown. An intensity, a presence, and the weight of a life already tested. Brosnan was admitted into the Drama Centre in London, a crucible where over half of the pupils quit due to the constant pressure. After the troupe invited him to join. With the appetite of one without a safety net, he continued to pursue odd jobs while learning Shakespeare, mime, and even circus techniques. Following years of rigorous training, he was cast in the stage thriller Wait Until Dark in 1976. Playing a character who lurked in the background, poised to act at any time. Tennessee Williams' The Red Devil Battery. Sign. A drama that had failed in America, but gained fresh life in London thanks to his captivating performance. Debuted a year later. Film employment came next in 1980, but it began modestly. For a mere $50, Elizabeth Taylor appeared on television for less than 30 seconds in The Mirror Cracked. He co-starred with Helen Mirren and Bob Hoskins in The Long Good Friday that same year. Once more in a supporting role, but in a movie that would go on to become a cult favorite. He was steadily gaining ground, silently and resolutely. Then, in 1982, Brosnan was offered the lead in NBC's new detective series, Remington Steele. But fate intervened again and tried out for a minor supporting role. He was not at all like the seasoned American charmer for whom the role was originally intended. And at the age of 29 he was almost unknown in America, but as soon as he entered the room, the role became his. When Remington Steele began on October 1982, it gained 15.6 million weekly viewers, aired in over 80 countries, and made Brosnan a household brand. However, celebrity came with its own set of difficulties. He was instantly dubbed the future James Bond by both reviewers and fans, a moniker that would be applied to him for more than 10 years. Pierce Brosnan was more than just a budding actress by the early 1980s. Already, rumors circulated that he would be the new James Bond. The appropriate ears heard such murmurs in 1983, when he visited the set of For Your Eyes Only, where his wife, actress Cassandra Harris, starred. Bond producer Albert Cubby, Broccoli, noticed him. It appeared as though fate was calling, but timing had other ideas. Broccoli turned to a person nearby and said, "If he can act, he's my guy." Brosnan's first opportunity was lost when Roger Moore, who was nearing the end of his career as 007, was convinced to return for one more movie with an extraordinary offer. History was repeated in 1986, 3 years later. Remington Steele was scrapped, freeing Brosnan just as the Bond role opened again. Negotiations commenced, but before anything was signed, NBC unexpectedly renewed the show for another season. Due to contractual obligations, Brosnan had to watch his friend Timothy Dalton take the part. In public, he kept cordial. The disappointment was profound in private. He continued to work consistently for the next 8 years, which fans now refer to as the Lost Bond years. Intense spy thrillers like The Fourth Protocol, atmospheric dramas like Nomads, and even light-hearted Diet Coke commercials in tuxedos, humorously hinting to the role that kept eluding him. Then the call eventually came in 1994. He wasn't a rookie looking for a break this time. He was an experienced entertainer who had waited, persevered, and prepared. For a faltering studio and a dying series, GoldenEye turned into a high-stakes test. Bond might vanish with it if it didn't work. Brosnan came through. The movie brought the series back to life, brought Bond back to a younger audience, and made $353 million worldwide. He executed the majority of his own exploits, including an amazing 220-meter dam bungee jump that was deemed too dangerous for insurance. With 3 more Bond movies that made a total of $1.2 billion, he became the iconic 007 for millions of fans. He refused to leave the part he had battled so hard to portray, not even offers like Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones. But it ended suddenly in 2004 when he was at the peak of his fame. He got a quick phone call as he was filming After Sunset. A fantastic James Bond you were. Thank you. Farewell. Only the fact that younger applicants had been secretly considered for 2 years was disclosed. There was no warning or thorough justification. At $431 million, his last Bond movie, Die Another Day, had been the highest-grossing picture in the series. However, it was now irrelevant. He started to be perceived by casting directors as too suited for other parts. Longtime employees were let go, offers decreased, and he went through a period of silent personal hardship. Years later, when the Casino Royale trailer aired, his kids would remember the first time they saw him cry. It wasn't just a piece of what he lost that day. He was a part of that. Years later, Brosnan would reflect on the journey with calm appreciation for each step rather than resentment. The heartaches, the victories, the close calls, and the early rejections. They had influenced not just the well-known actor, but also the man he developed into. Ultimately, his Bond years left a legacy that went beyond the memorable lines and box office results. It was in demonstrating to the world and to himself that perseverance can make even the most difficult situation into a turning point. Pierce Brosnan was engaged in a war that was far more brutal and real than anything depicted on TV at a time when the world viewed him as unbeatable. The man in the tux and the hero who always prevailed. There was only one guy who had his heart behind the red carpets and flash bulbs, Cassandra Harris. An attractive, witty actress who could brighten any space existed long before Bond scripts and box office successes. They first crossed paths in the late 1970s when her profession was well established and his was still in its infancy. Charlotte and Christopher, the children of a previous marriage, were being raised by Cassandra. She captivated everyone with her composure, charm, and quiet fortitude. It's possible that most males would have been hesitant to join an immediate family. Pice didn't stop for a second. She was remarkable, but it wasn't only her beauty that drew him in. It was her radiating warmth, the way she reduced loneliness in the world. He didn't come as a guest with her kids. As though he had always been there, he stepped in. After getting married in 1980, they had their son Sean 3 years later. Brosnan's smile isn't the polished charm of a budding star in those old family photos. It is the profoundly grounded contentment of a man who has at last discovered his place in the world. I wasn't a father, I was just Pierce. And then, I became daddy. That happiness made the subsequent events even more tragic, as he would later recollect. Cassandra started experiencing extreme exhaustion and an inexplicable aching in 1987 while working abroad. They initially believed it to be travel fatigue. The reality returned to London with ruthless clarity. The ovarian cancer has progressed. Later, according to Brosnan, it seemed as though the earth had parted beneath his feet. They were going about their daily lives 1 minute, and then everything was upended. The frigid, never-ending hospital hallways, the metallic stench of chemotherapy wards, and the silent fear between test results took over their lives from that day on. Cassandra underwent numerous operations and arduous months of treatment over the course of 4 unrelenting years. Although the illness took away her energy, strength, and hair, it was never able to take away her dignity. Everyone was in awe of her unwavering courage in facing every difficulty, demanding the truth, making her own decisions, and handling each day with grace. Pice referred to himself as the silent companion, constantly present, holding her hand, and providing support when no response could lessen the hurt. But he was cracking inside. At home, Sean, who was still a young child, would occasionally show up holding plastic stethoscopes in a toy doctor's coat and giving his mother pretend medicine. They both realized that make-believe couldn't alter reality, so it was sweet, innocent, and completely heartbreaking. On certain evenings when the home was quiet and the outside world seemed far away, Cassandra would talk to him quietly about life, love, and the odd serenity that results from facing the truth head-on rather than the illness. It was tender and cruel, a last gift of strength from a woman who refused to be remembered only for her illness. She whispered near the end, "Please, darling, don't worry. It's just a life coming to rest." Cassandra died on December 28, 1991, just 1 day after their 11th wedding anniversary. At the age of 43, Pierce was by her side with Christopher. The air in their home was heavy, still, and unbearably silent, and in the days that followed, Pierce moved like a man on autopilot, and Charlotte, who was away in London, called her. Sean, who was only 8 years old, was in the house, but he was too young to comprehend the finality of that quiet moment. Even though the weight of grief threatened to pull him under, he became the anchor. And at night, and on many subsequent nights, he would walk the halls, stopping at each child's doorway, listening for the steady rhythm of their breathing, as if to remind himself that something, anything, was still safe. He had funeral arrangements to make, people to comfort, and 3 children to somehow keep steady. Grief didn't fade, even at the height of his career, behind the flawless smile and the fitted suits. There was a man with a private sorrow that the world could not see. It rooted itself into the architecture of his life, lived in quiet mornings, and lingered in milestones she would never see, and in the sound of laughter that carried her voice. Some people carry pain like a badge. I carry it quietly because it's part of me now. It always will be. His daughters first witnessed him crying when the trailer for Casino Royale, the first Bond movie without him, aired years later. He would summarize it with words as stark as they were eternal. Life had not finished with him, it returned cold and purposeful, as if it had been waiting. And when it did not merely reopen old wounds. He had thought that losing Cassandra was the deepest wound a soul could bear, that no other blow could ever compare to the day he watched the woman he loved more than life itself slip away. This time, grief did not creep in to haunt the past, instead it came for the future. And it wore the same ruthless face, ovarian cancer. But now, 22 years after it had taken his wife, the same unrelenting disease returned. This time to take his daughter Charlotte, who was bright, warm, and strong. It tore them wider, making him relive every moment he had vowed never to experience again. Hidden deep within her, unsaid and unseen, was the same deadly shadow written into her DNA. The same disease that had already taken so much from their family returned like a predator retracing its own bloody path, striking the next generation mercilessly. She carried her mother's grace in her smile, her kindness in the way she touched a hand, and her steadiness in times of chaos. She was only 40 when the first symptoms appeared: a slight ache, a vague fatigue. Nothing to raise alarms, but Pierce sensed the change right away because he was too familiar with this rhythm, the silence before destruction. The air heavy with fear, and when the test confirmed what he had already feared, it was not shock that broke him, but a deep, bone-deep despair. The feeling of being hauled back to the same cliff from which he had been flung. For 3 relentless years, Charlotte, like her mother, faced the illness head-on, enduring surgeries, rounds of chemotherapy, and the protracted purgatory of waiting rooms, which smelled of antiseptic and resignation. She knew the fall would be just as long and cruel. Her determination remained unwavering, despite the fact that each treatment took more of her strength. Her 2 children, Isabella, 15, and Lucas, 8, watched her deteriorate in the same way that she had once watched Cassandra. It was a cruel mirror image, history repeating itself with surgical accuracy. She refused sympathy, instead requesting time to demonstrate to her kids that love was stronger than suffering. In June 2013, with the cancer spreading like an unstoppable tide, she did something extraordinary. She put on a white dress, stood tall against the weight of her body's failing strength, and married Alex, the man who had stood unwavering beside her, not just for a wedding, but to leave them with memories of courage, not just of illness. She smiled through the pain, her hands shaking, her eyes bright with joy and the unspoken knowledge of what was to come. It was a final stand, a declaration that love would have the last say. 2 weeks later, she was gone. June 28, 2013. A quiet Friday in London etched itself into Pierce's bones. There it was, the horrible symmetry nearly too accurate to bear. Charlotte died at 41, Cassandra at 43, and Lucas at 8, the same age Sean had been when Cassandra died. She was surrounded by her husband, children, and brothers, Christopher and Sean, when she went away. As if grief had a blueprint, returning to etch the same wounds at the same ages with surgical cruelty. Isabella was 15 years old, the same age Charlotte had been when her mother's illness was first revealed. Once again, Pice stood where no parent should ever be, burying a child, burying a future. He tried to be strong for his grandchildren, but some pain is indescribable. It is not poetic. It is not cinematic. His voice was calm, but every syllable held the weight of decades etched by loss. In 2014, at a Stand Up to Cancer event, the spotlight found him not glamorizing, but exposing. It is a hollowing stillness that creeps into the marrow that steals the shape of the days to come. He said, "I held the hand of my first wife, Cassie, who was generous, strong, and beautiful, before she died of ovarian cancer much too soon. And just last year, I held the hand of my funny, wonderful daughter, Charlotte, before she too died from this wretched inherited disease." The room fell silent, and there was nothing more to say. Some grief never goes away. Pierce Brosnan does not wear that anguish as a badge. It is knitted into his very structure. As permanent, as unshakable, and as unyielding as bone, it grows, reverberating across time, embedding itself into every breath. He had believed that Charlotte's death was the last blow. The symmetry of their departures, years apart but bound by the same cruel disease, had left him hollow. He had suffered both his wife and his daughter, who had both died of the same ruthless illness, leaving him with nothing left for life to take. Some losses feel like a theft, while others feel like the ground itself has been erased from under you. Despite all of this heartache, Key, the woman he met in 1994 at the most unlikely of places, a beach party in Cabo San Lucas, came into his life just months before he would formally transform into James Bond. But at that time, fame wasn't what made him who he was. She wasn't a part of the past, she was his future, his survival, his second chance. Keeley, a journalist, was kind, wise, and uninterested in the spotlight. She saw not the tuxedoed icon or the aspiring Bond star, but the man who still carried silences too heavy to name. He was still a man living in quiet grief, not looking for romance, just trying to keep moving forward. Healy became his shield when Charlotte became ill almost 20 years later, pulling Pierce back into the echo of his first major loss. In those early days, she didn't try to erase his grief or force joy into places where it didn't belong. Instead, she just stayed through sleepless nights and anniversaries that felt like open wounds. In 2001, they were married in an 800-year-old abbey surrounded by friends, family, and the kind of beauty that makes time seem to stop for a moment. For him, that day was more than a celebration because she kept the house together. She held him together, and she held space for his pain without requiring that he put it into words. In them, he found not a substitute for what had been lost, but a continuation of his role as a parent, which had always defined him more profoundly than any movie could. It was a statement that love still had a place in his life, and it marked the start of a new chapter in which he could be a father once more, this time to the two children they would have together, Dylan and Paris. Keeley's love was not loud or ostentatious, it was in the way she prioritized birthdays, how she kept the house cozy enough for laughter to reverberate even on the most trying days, and how she never asked him to move on from the loss, but instead supported him in adjusting to it. Throughout the years, the outside world would turn its gaze on them in ways that were not always kind. But Keeley was there, steady and unwavering, protecting the fragile threads of a family that had already been through too much. And she didn't try to replace what had been lost. Instead, she became the anchor that kept him from falling completely into grief when Charlotte passed away in 2013. Tabloids relentlessly scrutinized Keeley's appearance after the birth of their children. But Pierce remained unwavering in his defense of her, ignoring the criticism and speaking instead of the beauty he saw. "I love every curve of her body. She is the most beautiful woman in my eyes." That unwavering loyalty was the same one he had displayed throughout his life. It was just who he was. After decades of living under the spotlight of public criticism, Healy made headlines of her own in 2024 at the age of 61. Not for how she looked to others, but for a very personal change. She shed more than 100 pounds as a gift to her own health, rather than in response to criticism. "My body has survived love, children, and sorrow," she wrote. He found in her the fortitude to cope with his loss rather than a way out of it, meaning in the present, not a diversion from the past. The part she helped him accept was the most significant one he developed into after all the roles he had portrayed, including those of Bond, Remington Steele, action heroes, and tragic loves, father, husband, and survivor. He still lowers his voice and looks away when he talks about Cassandra or Charlotte. Time cannot cover some absences. He has never been able to get over the loss. He silently bears it with him every day. But when the weight got too much, he found a place to let it drop in Keeley. After a lifetime of free falls, a gentle landing. She never made an effort to replace the void left by the deceased. She merely showed him how to accept it, how to rediscover happiness despite its shaky edges. And she remained through all the highs and lows. That has been his life's silent miracle more than anything else. Most men could never imagine the storms he has survived. He buried the love of his life, watched helplessly while his daughter battled the same terrible disease, and repeatedly recovered from his loss. He believed he understood loss, but nothing could have prepared him for the subtle, premeditated betrayal from the same institution he had helped bring back to life, rather than from random people. Following 4 successful Bond movies, GoldenEye's revitalization of a dying franchise. 007's return to prominence on a global scale, risking his life in perilous stunts, and bearing the weight of a historic heritage with unshakable devotion. For years to come, Pierce Brosnan felt he had earned his spot in that tuxedo. Then the phone rang in 2004 while they were filming in the Bahamas. It was only a 47-second call. There was only a voice on the other end stating, "You were a great James Bond. Thank you very much," with no explanation, no dialogue, and no expression of gratitude. The line died, taking with it the chapter that had shaped his career. Goodbye. Losing the gig wasn't the most painful thing. It was later discovering the truth. Even as they arranged his departure, producers had been secretly auditioning his replacement for 2 years, giving him the impression that the future was still his. The wound was more profound than a job loss. It was the breakdown of confidence. The repercussions were like falling dominoes in the days that followed. 3 big movie deals disappeared virtually quickly, with his salary offers falling from $12 million to just 3, his worth in Hollywood vanished. The studios started calling him Bond, and famous image turned into a prison, preventing him from assuming positions rather than providing opportunities. He once said, "Life has to go on, and if it does, you better find something worth living for." For Pierce Brosnan, that something is no longer about avoiding danger on screen, but rather about facing the real-world threats that endanger our planet, our families, and our shared future. This quote could be the epilogue to his life story. Which chapter of Pierce Brosnan's story most resonates with you? Please share your thoughts below. If this story inspired you, please remember to like and share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope can survive anything. It's about making sure that even the most difficult beginnings can still lead to hopeful endings. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson in his journey, that even after loss, love and purpose can carry us forward.